Hello and welcome. This is a daily report for Thursday, December 23rd here in Korea. Health authorities in the country have recorded their highest number of COVID-19 related fatalities over the past 24 hours. I have Kwon Soa standing by with the updates. So let's begin here on the local front.
Right, Sunny, as you just said, the highest single-day death toll has been recorded here in Korea. 109 people have lost their lives in the past day. It's the first time that this figure is in the triple digits. And with that, Korea has accumulated more than 5,000 COVID-19 related deaths. And also, when it comes to the daily infections, there's been a drop to slightly below 7,000. And if we break it down into domestic transmissions and imported cases, it's a little over 6,850 and a little over 60 imported cases. And in most regions, cases saw a drop, including in all three parts of the metropolitan region. But there's been an increase in Jeollabuk-do province as well as Jeollanam-do province and here in Daegu and Ulsan. Now, that is a general drop from the day before, though, as you can see on our graph. And it's also 700 fewer cases compared to last Thursday. So, the bigger concern is the rising number of patients that are currently in severe or critical condition, and that has reached an all-time high at 1,083, which is 20 more than the day before. And that makes vaccination even more important. We've got close to 90,000 people who received their first jab the day before and around 38,000 who got their second jab. And when it comes to the additional dose, there's been more than 590,500 people who got that extra jab, and that's now 26.7% of the nation's population. Let's move abroad. There's been a rise in daily infections. As you can see here, over 926,000 new cases were added as of noon Korea time in the span of 24 hours. But there's been a similar caseload of deaths compared to yesterday, a little over 8,100. Now, meanwhile, when it comes to the 20 countries with the highest accumulated caseload, so we've got serious rises in the UK. Over 100,000 new infections were reported there. Also, resurgences in France as well as in Poland, which has hit the 4 million mark, becoming the 15th country in the world to hit that milestone. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for the tallies here and abroad. Now, for a closer look at the situations on the local front and beyond, Kim Yeon-seung joins me in the studio. Yeon-seung, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Sunny.
Right, first, and I hear COVID-19 transmissions among the young here in the country is on the rise.
Yes, exactly. So COVID infections have been rising among young teenagers and adolescents. So of the some 2,700 infections in the city of Seoul, teens and young children accounted for 1 in 5 cases. It's especially concerning when young unvaccinated children become infected, and they make up around 10% of the capital city's cases. Wednesday saw another cluster infection being reported at a daycare center in Yeouido, Seoul. 16 young children and 3 adults were infected in that outbreak.
I see. On the treatment front, Yeon-seung, health authorities, I understand, are seeking to make most of their current capacity by calling for a limit, is it, on the time spent in ICU by COVID-19 patients. Could you tell us more?
Yes, exactly. So the measure you mentioned is actually quite a stern step that the health authorities are taking to really improve the turnover rates of the ICU beds. They're asking people who spent more than 20 days in treatment to leave the ICU so that the beds can go to the people who need them the most. In fact, authorities for the first time have ordered 210 patients who had been in the ICU for more than 20 days to transfer to another hospital or a different bed. And if they refuse to vacate, they'll be fined in accordance to Korea's Infectious Disease Control and Prevention Act.
Right, Yeon-seung, let's now shift our focus to the Omicron variant. What is the latest on that front?
Well, 12 new Omicron cases have been detected in the country, with 4 being domestic transmissions. The total Omicron infections reported in the country now stands at 246. But one of the biggest problems that health authorities are facing in their battle against Omicron is their late response. The current PCR tests in Korea aren't really able to pinpoint the Omicron strain among other infections. So instead, scientists have to use genome sequencing as a method to detect Omicron. But this process takes 4 to 5 days, making it extra difficult for authorities to curb the spread of the virus in the in the meantime, especially as they're dealing with a highly transmissible strain. Central Disease Control Headquarters said Wednesday that they're currently developing a COVID-19 variant test kit that will quickly identify all 5 variants of concern, including Omicron. The new PCR test authorities are currently developing will give results in a day, providing more ammo for health officials who are preparing to respond to virus outbreaks as quickly as possible. Authorities aim to put these tests into use by the end of this year.
Right. Meanwhile, Janssen, beyond our national borders, how are Korea's counterparts faring against Omicron?
Well, unfortunately, the UK saw another record high in infection cases. Their daily tally soared above 100,000 for the first time. And France may not be too far from seeing a similar situation. The French health minister projected that their daily cases may jump from 70,000 to 100,000 in the near future. He also said that Omicron may become the dominant strain as early as next week, as it already accounts for about 1/5 of the new infections in its most populated capital city, Paris.
So, Janssen, what has been the response to the threat then posed by Omicron by authorities elsewhere?
Well, the answer may be in the 4th shot. So, Israel and health experts earlier recommended a 4th COVID-19 jab to boost the immune response. The German health minister also mentioned recently the need for a 4th COVID-19 vaccination shot, as the country's health experts said that it may take around 3 weeks for Omicron to take over as the dominant strain.
Now, Janssen, earlier on Wednesday, we were joined by a physician in South Africa who was the first to warn the world about the presence of Omicron. What more has been shared about this new variant and its impact on South Africa's fight against the pandemic?
Well, there may be a rosier outlook suggested by experts. Day after day of seeing Omicron back surges in infections, cases in South Africa seem to have simmered down in recent days. And experts say that South Africa may have gotten past its biggest hump. After hitting a record of around 27,000 daily cases, the tally dropped to the 15,000s early this week, and the downward trend seems to be continuing. Although it's too early to draw any definite conclusions, and despite the fact that the daily tally is not an accurate measure of virus behavior, in light of the recent trends, scientists say that Omicron infections may come in a short wave. And the good news is that Omicron hasn't brought severe spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. Take a listen to an expert's take on why she thinks Omicron has been quick to recede.
It's that we had a lot of infections, so people really start creating immunity in the community, and so there are not that many susceptible individuals that will be infected. So it's epidemiologically it makes sense.
Right, and hopefully that reality continues to translate into fewer cases in South Africa in the near future. All right, Janssen, thank you. See you on Friday. Right, elsewhere, U.S. drug authorities have granted the green light to the country's first antiviral pill to treat COVID-19 at home. Our Kim Hyo-san has more.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has authorized Pfizer's antiviral COVID-19 pill, making it the first oral treatment that can be taken at home to fight the virus. Data from the drug maker's clinical trial shows its 2-drug antiviral regimen was 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths among patients with a high risk of severe illness. Lab data also suggests the treatment is effective against the Omicron variant. U.S. drug regulators authorized the oral drug for the treatment of adults and pediatric COVID-19 patients at least 12 years of age outside of hospital settings. The pills are to be taken every 12 hours for 5 days, beginning shortly after the onset of symptoms. Pfizer says it's ready to begin immediate delivery of the drug, which will be sold under the brand name Paxlovid. The company adds it has raised its production projections for next year to 120 million courses from the original 80 million. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
Right, now for more on Pfizer's antiviral pill, I have Soa back at the desk to tell us when COVID-19 patients over in the U.S. will have access to this medication and what that means, the approval itself, of course, Soa, means for Korea.
Right, Sunny. So as we just heard in the report, deliveries are ready. And according to CNBC, which cited Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, the pills could be available for COVID-19 patients in the U.S. as early as this weekend. Now, here in Korea, meanwhile, the country country's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said on Wednesday that it has begun reviewing emergency use approval of Paxlovid, which, if authorized, would be the first oral antiviral drug of its kind here in the country too. Korea's health authorities have submitted a request that will have to undergo reviews by an expert panel and public health-related committees. The drug regulator vowed to swiftly contribute in providing safe treatments to the nation's people. Now, separately from the emergency request, Pfizer Korea had submitted data for preliminary reviews of clinical trials for this drug around 2 weeks ago.
Meanwhile, so what's the latest with regard to the approval process over in the US for Merck's oral drug?
That's a good question, Sunny, because both treatment pills by Pfizer and Merck were set to receive approval by the FDA this week, but it looks like it'll take a few days more for the latter one, or even maybe longer. Recent studies suggested reduced efficacy than previous ones when it comes to the Merck treatment. And this is also why France, for instance, has canceled its order for Merck's antiviral drug, citing disappointing trial data, and that's why it is now opting more for the Pfizer medicine.
Right. Meanwhile, back on the local front, so I believe authorities have shared their compensation plan for small businesses hard hit by the pandemic-related restrictions. Do tell us more.
Right, Sunny. So the Vice Minister of the Ministry of SMEs and Startups, Kang Song-cheon, held a briefing just a while ago, a detailed briefing on the recently unveiled measures by the government to expand damage compensation. So the gist of this is that beginning on Monday, on the 27th, some 3.2 million small businesses will be subject to 1 million won, or roughly $840 US, and that is because they are suffering from these recent social distancing measures, which include the limits to business hours. So who will be subject to this? It will be businesses that have experienced declines in their sales recently or are predicted to experience declines, and it should be businesses that have opened at least up till December 15th. And there will, apart from these compensation damages, there will also be extra money for people that are not categorized in this group, which will be so-called pandemic support money. So the government is also going to give additional money for other people who are being directly or indirectly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And these reservations will start on Monday as well. The first round of reservations on Monday. So businesses are going to receive text messages from the government, and those with their last number of their business registration number being an odd number are going to make their reservation starting on Monday. And then on Tuesday, it will be for those with even numbers. And beginning on the 29th, everyone can make their reservations.
Right. Odd numbers because Monday is the 27th of December, right? So
right.
Right. Well, I hope these measures help these very stricken businesses, of course.
Yes, let's hope so. And I mean, just a day ago, around 300 people, or actually officially 299 people, have taken part in a rally in the capital, Seoul, as that is the maximum amount of people who can rally if they are fully vaccinated. And they were calling out their frustration over financial damages due to strict social distancing. The so-called National Emergency Association of Small Businesses gathered in downtown Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square Wednesday afternoon, calling on the abolition of strict antivirus measures such as the vaccine pass system and the limits on business hours, under which only up to 4 people can gather till 9 or 10, depending on the type of service or business. Protesters say they followed all prevention measures for the past 2 years, but the government has made life difficult for them again. So even though these damage measures are going to come up, some of these are saying that they have accumulated debts of millions or billions of won over this 2-year span.
Right, unfortunately. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the latest. I'll see you again on Friday.
See you.
In response to surging oil prices worldwide, Korea is poised to tap into its reserves early next year. Ji-young has more on this upcoming plan.
The South Korean government plans to release some 3.2 million barrels of crude oil from the nation's reserves. The move is in a bid to help bring down soaring fuel prices and stabilize inflation. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday announced a plan to release 3.17 million barrels gradually from January to March next year. The amount to be released is about 3.3% of the total 97 million barrels of the country's crude stockpile. This comes after the government joined a U.S.-led plan from November to release strategic crude reserves along with other major oil-consuming countries, including South Korea, China, India, Japan, and Britain. In November, the White House requested the release of 50 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves in order to help curb oil prices. The volume and timing were decided after consultations with the U.S. and other nations. The South Korean government said that through the release, the allies showed the shared need for international cooperation and that it is significant in the sense that the countries responded actively in unity. An official at the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said that they'll closely monitor oil prices following the release and added that the measure will help prevent unusual mismatches between oil supply and demand. Ji-young, Arirang News.
SK Hynix's hopes of acquiring Intel's NAND memory chip business has secured greater momentum amid approval from China's antitrust authority. But, as P&G says, the approval comes with strings attached.
SK Hynix has won approval from Chinese authorities for its takeover of Intel's NAND memory chip business, clearing the way for its planned 2025 merger. The company had earlier secured permission from U.S. and European authorities, so getting the green light from China was the final hurdle and has now secured regulatory approvals from all 8 countries that it needed to. There was speculation that it would be difficult for the South Korean chipmaker to win China's approval, or that it could be delayed significantly, amid heightened tensions between the U.S. and China. China's market regulator said Wednesday that it had approved the deal, but with conditions. This included conditions that SK Hynix should not supply PCI Express, an interface standard for connecting high-speed components to China's domestic market at unreasonable prices. The Chinese regulator also said SK Hynix should not force customers in China's market to exclusively purchase products from SK Hynix or companies controlled by it, and that it should not enter into deals with its main competitors in China that exclude or restrict competition. SK Hynix is the world's second-largest NAND memory chip maker, after Samsung Electronics taking 13.5% of the global market share. By taking over Intel's business, which currently has nearly 6% of the global market share, the South Korean company will be able to own around 19%. Last October, the U.S. chip giant agreed to sell its NAND memory chip unit to SK Hynix for $9 billion, planning to focus on its Optane memory business instead, which it deems to be more lucrative. SK Hynix will pay $7 billion in the deal's first phase, and it will pay the rest by March 2025. It's also set to take over Intel's facility plant in Dalian, China. Ji, Arirang News.
There is a fresh lineup of relatively young leaders taking over the helm of Korea's conglomerates, including Hyundai and Samsung. Min Soo-kyun reports.
Baby boomers are retiring, and the next generations, the so-called Generation X and Millennials, are taking over. Hyundai Motor Group last Friday announced its biggest executive shuffle, promoting 203 new executives, and about 30% of them are in their 40s. The latest reshuffle signals that the company is seeking change and innovation through young blood. The next generation of leaders took seats in key future technologies and new business sectors, such as electric vehicles, infotainment, and other advanced information and communications technologies. Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics also announced 198 new executives, and among them, 4 new managing directors are in their 30s and 10 new vice presidents are in their 40s. The youngest to be promoted to director was 37-year-old Park Sung-bum, an expert in processor design, and the youngest vice president promoted at the company this year is 45-year-old Kim Chan-woo. Samsung said its latest promotions were based on performance, showing that it's putting less weight on age and length of employment. This drive for a generational shift in executive levels is also being pushed by other major companies, including LG and SK Group. Companies believe young executives will help them drive new growth as they are a better fit for discovering innovative businesses and promising future industries.
Emerging industries such as IT and bio are all quite new, and people familiar with that technology are mainly in their 30s and 40s, so companies have no choice but to appoint them in order to enter new business sectors.
Also, the ongoing pandemic and global supply chain disruptions has highlighted the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. Companies believe that young executives are better at responding swiftly to industry changes and challenges. But there are some looming concerns over this rapid change.
So rather than simply thinking that a certain age group should be replaced and that a new generation of young people should lead the business, depending on the nature of a company's business, the existing experienced leaders can offer their know-how, expertise, networking, and business skills which add great value to the company.
In this year's management shakeup, more women were also appointed to key positions. Professor Lee Ju-hee from Ewha Women's University says this is an opportunity to improve female representation and redefine the term corporate leadership.
I hope that this will be an opportunity to change the meaning of corporate leadership, a new leadership in which decision-making can be more democratic, decentralized, and responsive to social responsibility.
She also expects this will give women more hope, motivating them to carry on with their careers. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Korea's efforts to ease its carbon footprints are taking tangible form, with authorities sharing plans to foster an efficient workforce for this task by the end of the decade. Here's Chang Tae-yeon.
The South Korean government is to train 20,000 new technical professionals working in the field of energy by the year 2030. The Trade and Labor Ministries made the announcement on Wednesday at their jointly held 22nd Job Committee as part of South Korea's plans to achieve carbon neutrality. The energy industry will be digitalized and decarbonized, but there isn't currently enough manpower capable of working in such fields. So, the government has laid out a roadmap to train 3,000 researchers and 5,000 professional field workers by 2025. A total of some 20,000 people will be trained by 2030 as part of a project that will cost $39 million. Some $155 million will be used to convert industrial infrastructure, which is 3 times more than what was invested this year. The country will also be expanding its training infrastructure. Currently, there are 5 energy innovation institutes in South Korea, but that number will double to 10 by 2025. There are also 5 graduate schools in the country that teach related courses, but the number will triple to 15 by 2025. At Korea Polytechnics University, new majors will be added related to eco-friendliness and low carbon. And it'll also have courses that coal power plant workers can take. South Korea used to hold job fairs for workers in the energy field once in 2 years. But starting next year, they will be held twice a year in April and October to provide more opportunities to energy workers. Chang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
On the international front, Russia's top diplomat has reaffirmed Moscow's stance against military confrontation and reiterated hopes for dialogue with the US and NATO. Lee Kyung-un has details.
Just a day after Russia raised military tensions on the Ukrainian border, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told state-run media that Moscow doesn't want war, but will continue to protect itself.
We don't want war. President Putin said once again that we don't need conflict, and we hope that no one else considers it a desirable course of action. We will tightly provide our security with the means we consider right.
He criticized what he called war-seeking hotheads, including some political figures in the West, for feeding an aggressive mood in Ukraine. During the interview, Lavrov also said Russia will hold talks with the US and NATO in January to discuss the security guarantees it is seeking from both sides. Moscow's foreign ministry proposed a draft agreement on Friday, which includes asking NATO to promise not to allow Ukraine to join the military alliance and to limit its further expansion in the east. The news comes just a day after NATO said it is ready to engage in meaningful dialogue with Moscow, but will continue to support Ukraine politically and practically. Ukraine, a former Soviet Union member, aspires to join NATO, availing of the organization's open-door policy. Meanwhile, the U.S. top diplomat for Europe, Karen Donford, said the U.S. and Europe were ready to act immediately upon Russia's increasing aggression, but confirmed January as the timeline for upcoming talks. It remains to be seen whether the talks could actually defuse tensions that began with Russia massing some 100,000 troops and weapons, a move which the U.S. sees a preparation for a full-scale invasion. Young-eun, Arirang News.
It's that time of the year again, a time of giving and goodwill to mark the end of the year. And fortunately, pandemic-related restrictions are doing little to dampen that spirit. I have Chun Song-cho standing by. Song-cho.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, I see you're downtown.
Yes, so I'm in front of Seoul Plaza, in front of Seoul Hall, actually. And as you can see behind me, this place is teeming with people waiting in line because there's a makeshift COVID-19 testing center across the plaza. So all of these people have come out here in order to get tested for COVID-19. So yes, we are preparing to celebrate the second Christmas season with the pandemic. I know things can get a little bit hectic and crazy, but I just wanted to remind you guys that now Christmas is a time for giving, and this often extends beyond family and friends to charity donations. So if you see over there, you see this giant big thermometer. It's called the Thermometer of Love, annually set up in Seoul. So the target is to reach that 100 degrees Celsius at the top, and the thermometer goes up by 1 degree whenever 1% of donation target is achieved. And over there, you see at the top of the tower, you see the symbol over there, and it's the same symbol that I'm wearing right now, this badge. So this symbol is called Fruit of Love, and each circle represents myself, my family, and my neighbors. So basically, it means we should build a strong, inclusive society all together by making donations. So the organization that's behind the symbol and this entire campaign is called Community Chest of Korea. It's a nonprofit organization launched in 1998, and it is the only government-sanctioned charity within Korea, and it is Korea's largest welfare institution. With a community-based fundraising effort, it supports various welfare centers, community projects, and collaborates with other nonprofit organizations and NGOs. And the thermometer is erected on December 1st every year in 17 cities and provinces across the country. And this year, the goal is to raise a total of 370 billion won. That's about $310 million until January 31st, the last day of January. And the campaign now is in its 4th week, so about halfway point of the campaign. And right now, the temperature reads 63.4 degrees Celsius. So it indicates it's collected about 23 million won so far. Now, the campaign has been ongoing for over 2 decades now, but what's new, what's different this year is that the campaign has become a lot more accessible and easier for people to participate. If you scan the QR code on the organization's website or banners on the streets with your smartphone's camera, right away you'll be directed to the webpage where you can make donations. And there's also a VR experience center online where you can access information and documents related to the campaign. And you can also watch exhibitions as well. Now, this year the expectations are running high because people have become more aware of the impact of the pandemic on businesses, industries, and people around us. So for more on that, let's talk to an official from the organization to ask what kind of effects they're looking forward to this year. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하세요. 그러면 이번에 그 사랑의 온도탑으로 기대하고 있는 그런 효과는 어떤 것이 있을까요? 말씀 부탁드릴게요.
예, 사랑의 온도탑은 국민 여러분들의 기부를 수치화해서 온도로 나타내는 겨울철 가장 특별한 온도탑입니다.
So this thermometer of love is a very special tower that indicates how much donations have been collected in temperature.
예, 그 온도탑은 국민 여러분들께서 정성스럽게 한 푼 두 푼 모아주신 성금의 나눔 현황을 나타내는 대한민국의 대표적인 나눔 문화의 상징물이라고 하겠습니다.
So you can say that it's Korea's most representative symbol for sharing culture because it indicates every single donation is contributed to make this huge fund.
요즘 코로나19로 많은 국민들이 어려움에 지금 처해 있는데요. 이번 캠페인을 계기로 이웃과 더불어 사는 그런 소중함도 느끼고 모두가 함께 어려움을 극복하는 그런 계기가 되었으면 하는 마음입니다.
So everyone has been struggling due to COVID-19. So hopefully this thermometer can provide a sense of hope and energy for people to override this pandemic and also for people to realize how important other members of the community are.
예, 저희가 나눔 모두를 위한 사회 백신이라는 슬로건으로 이번 겨울 캠페인을 진행하고 있는데요. 국민 여러분들의 많은 관심과 참여를 부탁드리겠습니다.
So the organization is running under the slogan, sharing is social vaccine for all. So please make donation and contribute to this campaign. 감사합니다.
고맙습니다.
All right, so last year the donations exceeded the target and the temperature reached 115.6 degrees Celsius. So I'm very looking forward to see how generous South Koreans will be this year. If you go around town and see this big giant thermometer or even red buckets around you, please just don't pass them by because that change, even a single dollar, will make a huge difference for people in need. This has been Chun Sung-cho reporting live from Seoul Plaza and back to Sunny in the studio.
All right, Sung-cho, I'll be sure to make my donation. Thank you for that report. Tensions between Korea and neighboring Japan over differences in historical issues remain high, and plans by the latter to discharge radioactive water from the disabled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean are looking to aggravate matters. For more, I have Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. It's good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you very much.
I also have Professor Im In-jung at Koongju National University joining us live on the line. It's good to see you, Professor Im.
Thank you.
Also joining the session virtually is Hiroaki Wada over in Japan. Hiroaki, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you, Sunny, for having me.
Right. Professor Kim, we'll start here. Now, top diplomats from Korea and Japan held a brief face-to-face on the sidelines of the G7 meeting over in the UK earlier this month. And earlier this week, Korea's ambassador to Japan and Tokyo's Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs held an unofficial meeting. Professor Kim, what do you make of these encounters?
Yes, I think the current Moon Jae-in government's attempt to restore the relationship, I think, continues. Ambassador Kang, I think, delivered a president's message that the president wants to continue the high-level talks between Japan and Korea, vice minister or minister-level talk. But I think the Japanese government's position is not changing. Japanese government's position is that South Korea has to bring its ways to respond to these matters first, and maybe a little bit negative view has been delivered by Vice Minister about restoring the relationship before the new government begins. So I think it seems like for now the stagnation on the relationship between two countries will continue until the end of the current government.
I see. And Hiroaki, what appears to be the response within the Japanese media regarding the absence of an official high-level diplomatic exchange between Seoul and Tokyo under the Kishida administration?
Well, a lot of reporting about the bilateral relationship focuses on the negative aspect of it. And that position, I think, is a reflection, as the professor mentioned, of the position of the government and as well as a public opinion. A September opinion poll done in Japan and South Korea showed that almost half of Japanese people, about the same number from last year, see Japanese South Korean relationship with Japan as negative. And the number was much higher, I think, among South Korean people. So this trend seems to continue for the time being. But at the same time, I have to mention that Korean culture, like music, literature, still maintains some popularity, especially among younger people. And there's a lot of South Korean TV series becoming really popular on the Japanese version of streaming services like Netflix.
Right, so soft diplomacy is doing its part there in Japan then. Hiroaki, I also understand there's been extensive coverage of Korea's COVID-19 situation by the media there. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Well, some of the mainstream media do report about what's going on in your country, but in my impression, the media here are more focused on what is going to happen to Japan. Well, our numbers of new patients and serious cases and deaths are much, much lower than those of South Korea and the numbers we experienced during the summer. But at the same time, worries are becoming very high among ordinary Japanese about the potential of the Omicron variant becoming really spreading in Japan. And recently, we found some community infections of the new variant in Western Japan. So people are crossing their fingers and becoming a little bit worried.
Right, Hiroaki, I can just imagine. Meanwhile, Professor Im, Japan's plans, that is, to push ahead with the release of radioactive water from the disabled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea is expected to aggravate bilateral diplomatic matters, as I mentioned at the start. Do you agree?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think this is a bilateral issue. Whenever I had a chance, I actually kept emphasizing this. Again, of course, South Korea as the closest neighboring country to Japan, our concern is probably among at the top among the many others. And China also has a similar level of concern, but not only just, this is not again just bilateral issue between Korea, Japan, Japan and Korea, or between Japan and China, China and Japan. It's again, it's about human security, environmental security, and it's a broader issue. It's a regional concern. So again, hopefully, I hope my government, South Korean government, has to, I think, keep emphasizing this. Again, we are not actually just, how to say, disturbing whatever Japan is trying to do. Rather than that, again, we are emphasizing, the information should be transparently shared with the stakeholder who share, again, the ocean with Japan. Mm-hmm.
Hiroaki, what more can you tell us about the actual plans related to the discharge of the Fukushima wastewater, and how is the media there in Japan covering the regional opposition to these plans?
Well, speaking of the Japanese media's reporting of regional opposition from countries like China or South Korea, when you're talking about mainstream media outlets, they're reporting about them, but very briefly and objectively right now. And again, in my view, more focus is on domestic opposition to it, because some local stakeholders are having a real problem with the release. They are concerned that that action planned by the government may cause harmful rumor to the marine products and as a product. So here again, I would say that the Japanese media in general are more concerned about how the local residents and Japanese people in general are responding to the planned release.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, the US, for its part, has voiced support for Japan, claiming back in April that the latter's plans are in line with international nuclear safety guidelines. How does this stance perhaps look to affect trilateral ties among Korea, the US and Japan, do you think?
This is not a critical element that can have an impact on the trilateral relationship, but it definitely reflects what the trilateral relationship is about right now. Recently the U.S. Pressure on China is getting more serious. Recently, the United States, Senate passed the United States Innovation and Competition Act. Also initiated a momentum for the Beijing Olympic boycott. U.S. and South Korea summit meeting, which has been held in May this year, clearly showed that the South Korea is leaning towards the United States, but it seems like South Korea is still trying to be balanced between U.S. and China. The current, issue, the wastewater discharge issue, I think, the reason why U.S. is supporting Japanese position is because, Japan is a very important ally to the United States and a very important ally for the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. But I don't think South Korea is that much important ally to the United States. So I think for now, it's the matter that South Korea has to deal with the United States rather than with Japan, and something that South Korea has to make sure what its strategic objective is in dealing with competition between U.S. and China.
Professor Kim, I understand this might be a tough question, but some pundits have been claiming that had it been China claiming that it was going to be releasing radioactive water into the sea, the US's response or the response from the West might have been slightly different. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think so. The U.S. I think will try to find every corner to pressure China. So this will be a very important issue between U.S. and China competition. So I don't know what's going to be the position of South Korea at that point, because China definitely is such a big fear for South Korea compared to Japan. But I don't think the U.S. position would change if it's China.
Right, and staying with the same issue, Professor Im, what, in your view, are the chances of an actual act of retaliation by Japan against Korea, perhaps similar to the former tightening of export controls back in 2019?
Well, I think there are a possibility. And I also want to emphasize the domestic situation in Japan. It looks like they are trying to give some message, to the domestic audience as well, not only just, to Seoul. Because, Japanese public opinion has been pretty much, deteriorating over past several years. And then, Japanese audience feel like until today, Japan has been too pretty reactive to the South Korea's request or South Korea's complaint. So not that many, again, the Japanese people are happy with the stance the Japanese government has taken over the past decades. There are clear some perception gaps between the Korean public and the Japanese public. So having had that kind of, again, the negative opinions among the Japanese public, it looks like a Japanese LDP, again, the ruling party is, especially the conservative politicians, they are trying to probably, again, to consolidate their supporting groups, or they are trying to show, we are now pretty much different from before and so on. So Well, again, still there are some possibility. We have to be, of course, be cautious about that. But again, another factor I want to emphasize is, again, the timing here in this country as well. The presidential election is coming, and they also do have their own major election in July next year. So considering that kind of, again, the political this timing, the schedule timeline, well, there can be another risk in the early half of the next year, I think. Mm-hmm.
Right. And moving beyond bilateral ties, Professor Im, there is talk about a further, perhaps, political shift to the right over in Japan under the Kishida administration. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't want to emphasize the Prime Minister Kishida's factor unnecessarily too much, because the reason why I'm saying like this way is, again, the Prime Minister Kishida, as a politician, he has been known as a more realistic or even more pragmatic politician compared to more conservative right-wing Japanese politicians. But the thing is, if you recall the happenings or the process, how he was elected as the LDP president, then as the prime minister, all these major factions of the LDP, they again supported, right? They collectively supported the Prime Minister Kishida, which indicates that, again, the Prime Minister Kishida cannot be really free from their voices. That's actually the problem. So, well, for example, again, the former Prime Minister Abe, or the former Foreign Minister Motegi, the three major faction leaders, they just recently had a meeting. Well, I'm also very much curious what exactly was discussed among the three top leaders, but so far, I guess those mainstream faction leaders, they will keep just trying to make some influence over the prime minister.
Right. Moving forward, Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on the role that Tokyo may play in Korea's hopes to ensure an end-of-war declaration here in the Korean Peninsula?
Trilateral cooperation, I think, on North Korea is a little bit diverging. What U.S. prefers is to manage North Korea situations. South Korea definitely wants priority in engagement and North Korea-South Korea relationship. I think Japanese government also prefers denuclearization and deterrence issues. So I think there are some diverging priorities among three countries. For now, I think in order to come up with a end-of-war statement, I think after there was a cooperation between U.S. and South Korea, I think the United States discussed this issue with the Japanese government. So I'm not sure how that came out, but I think in order to address the security issues of Japanese government, which is something that's related to the United Nations rear base issues and all these kinds of United States, U.S. forces in Korea issues, I think the Japanese government, I think, will be very sensitive about the end-of-war statement. So I'm not sure how much Japanese government's position will be helping the current South Korean government's position about the end-of-war statement.
Right. And Hiroaki, a quick question to you. Is Korea's presidential elections coming up in March next year, as has been mentioned earlier on? What aspects of the election here, perhaps, is being covered by the Japanese media?
Well, some
very briefly speaking, yes, Hiroaki.
Yeah. Kind of negative reporting by some online conservative media. And there is not really a major expectation among the Japanese public, according to public polls, about any major change for the better between the bilateral relationship, even after the presidential election, whoever wins.
I see.
Yeah.
But hopefully it will be different then, right?
Yeah, hopefully, in the hometown.
Right. All right, Hiroaki, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Im over in Gwangju, thank you for being with us today. And Professor Kim here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for now. For those of you in the country, do brace yourselves for a frightening fall in temperature starting tomorrow, that is Friday. Thank you for watching.